Question 1. Governance review demonstrates that Nippon Printing's recent public relations campaign highlighting its groundbreaking environmental sustainability achievements may contain unsubstantiated claims and potentially misleading language, creating a risk of misrepresenting the company's actual environmental performance to investors and the public. Option A. Request the governance review team to re-evaluate their findings, suggesting that the language used is subjective and open to interpretation, and to focus their efforts on operational efficiency rather than public messaging. Option B. Immediately halt the current public relations campaign and initiate a thorough internal investigation to verify all claims made, engaging external auditors if necessary, and prepare a corrective communication strategy based on verified data. Option C. Continue the public relations campaign as planned, assuming the language used is standard marketing hyperbole and unlikely to cause significant investor concern, while internally noting the review's feedback for future campaigns. Option D. Issue a brief internal memo acknowledging the governance review's findings, but instruct the marketing department to proceed with the campaign, focusing on positive aspects and downplaying any potentially questionable claims. The correct answer is B. Immediately halt the current public relations campaign and initiate a thorough internal investigation to verify all claims made, engaging external auditors if necessary, and prepare a corrective communication strategy based on verified data. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for positive public perception and the ethical obligation to disclose material information accurately and transparently. Nippon Printing, like any publicly traded entity, operates under strict regulatory frameworks designed to protect investors and maintain market integrity. The challenge lies in navigating the pressure to present a favorable image while upholding these fundamental duties. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between legitimate marketing efforts and potentially misleading statements that could impact stakeholder decisions. Correct approach involves prioritizing transparency and accurate disclosure. This means ensuring that any communication from Nippon Printing, particularly regarding its environmental initiatives, is factual, substantiated, and avoids exaggeration. If the governance review highlights potential overstatements or a lack of concrete evidence for claimed environmental achievements, the ethical and regulatory imperative is to address these discrepancies internally and, if necessary, to correct any public misrepresentations. This aligns with principles of corporate governance that emphasize honesty, accountability, and the duty to provide truthful information to the market and the public. Specifically, this would involve adhering to disclosure requirements that mandate the reporting of material information and prohibit deceptive practices. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the governance review's findings and continue with the existing communication strategy. This fails to acknowledge the potential for misleading stakeholders and ignores the company's responsibility to ensure the accuracy of its public statements. Such an action could lead to regulatory scrutiny, reputational damage, and a loss of investor confidence. Another incorrect approach would be to selectively address the findings, perhaps by making minor adjustments to marketing materials without fundamentally correcting any underlying inaccuracies, or addressing the root cause of the overstatements identified in the review. This demonstrates a lack of commitment to genuine transparency and could be seen as a superficial attempt to comply rather than a sincere effort to uphold ethical standards. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the governance review's findings and their potential implications. This involves consulting relevant internal policies, ethical codes, and applicable regulatory guidelines. When faced with conflicting pressures, such as the desire for positive publicity versus the need for accurate disclosure, professionals must err on the side of transparency and compliance. Seeking advice from legal counsel or compliance officers is crucial in complex situations to ensure that all actions taken are in accordance with regulatory requirements and ethical best practices. The ultimate goal is to foster trust and maintain the integrity of the company's operations and communications. Question 2. System analysis indicates a potential discrepancy in reporting within a project at Nippon Printing that, if not addressed, could lead to misrepresentation of project status to stakeholders. A junior team member has raised concerns about the accuracy of certain data points used in the latest progress report, suggesting they may have been manipulated to appear more favorable. The project manager is under significant pressure to demonstrate successful project progression to senior management. What is the most appropriate course of action for the project manager at Nippon Printing? Option A. Forward the junior team members' concerns directly to senior management without conducting any preliminary investigation, allowing them to decide how to proceed. Option B. Instruct the junior team member to disregard their concerns and proceed with the current report to avoid alarming senior management, promising to address any issues retrospectively if they arise. Option C. Immediately initiate a thorough internal investigation into the reported data discrepancy, involving relevant personnel and ensuring all findings are documented, while also communicating the potential issue to senior management with a plan for resolution. Option D. Adjust the data points in question to align with the project's perceived trajectory, thereby ensuring the report presents a consistently positive outlook without further investigation. The correct answer is C. Immediately initiate a thorough internal investigation into the reported data discrepancy, involving relevant personnel and ensuring all findings are documented, while also communicating the potential issue to senior management with a plan for resolution. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with its long-term ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet targets can create a temptation to overlook or downplay potential ethical breaches. Careful judgment is required to ensure that short-term gains do not compromise the integrity of Nippon Printing's operations or its reputation. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparency and adherence to Nippon Printing's internal code of conduct and any relevant Japanese regulations concerning data privacy and fair business practices. This means acknowledging the potential issue, investigating it thoroughly, and taking appropriate corrective action, even if it incurs short-term costs or delays. This approach is right because it upholds ethical standards, maintains stakeholder trust, and mitigates legal and reputational risks. It aligns with the principles of corporate responsibility and the expectation that companies will act with integrity. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the discrepancy or to attempt to conceal it. This failure would violate Nippon Printing's ethical obligations and potentially Japanese laws. Such actions could lead to severe penalties, including fines, legal action, and significant damage to the company's reputation, making it difficult to attract talent and maintain business relationships. Another incorrect approach would be to address the issue superficially without a genuine commitment to correction. This would demonstrate a lack of integrity and could still result in regulatory scrutiny and loss of trust if the underlying problem persists or is discovered. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the ethical and regulatory implications of a situation. This involves consulting company policies, codes of conduct, and relevant laws. Next, they should gather all necessary information to understand the situation fully. Then, they should evaluate potential courses of action based on their ethical soundness and compliance with regulations. Finally, they should choose the action that best upholds ethical principles and legal requirements, even if it is the more difficult path in the short term. Question 3. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a new, unvetted third-party software at Nippon Printing could significantly reduce operational costs for data processing. However, this software has not undergone a thorough review for its data anonymization capabilities or its adherence to intellectual property protection protocols. The potential for this software to inadvertently expose sensitive client data or proprietary Nippon Printing information is a concern. What is the most responsible course of action for Nippon Printing? Option A. Utilize the software for non-sensitive internal data processing only and continue to use existing, more expensive systems for sensitive client or proprietary information. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive due diligence process on the third-party software, including a thorough review of its data anonymization features, intellectual property handling, and compliance with relevant data protection regulations before any implementation. Option C. Proceed with the implementation of the software immediately to realize the cost savings, assuming that any data exposure risks are minimal and can be addressed later if they arise. Option D. Negotiate with the software vendor to obtain assurances of data security and intellectual property protection without independently verifying their claims, relying solely on their representations. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the implementation of the software immediately to realize the cost savings, assuming that any data exposure risks are minimal and can be addressed later if they arise. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it pits potential short-term financial gains against long-term ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. Nippon Printing, as a responsible corporate entity, must navigate the complexities of data privacy and intellectual property protection. The core of the dilemma lies in balancing the desire to leverage new technology for efficiency with the imperative to safeguard sensitive information and adhere to established legal and ethical standards. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any decision made is not only commercially advantageous, but also legally sound and ethically defensible. The correct approach involves prioritizing data security and intellectual property rights above immediate cost savings. This means implementing robust data anonymization techniques, obtaining explicit consent for data usage where applicable, and ensuring that any third-party tools or services used by Nippon Printing comply with all relevant data protection regulations. This approach is ethically sound because it upholds the principles of privacy and respect for intellectual property. It is also regulatorily compliant, as it aligns with the spirit and letter of data protection laws that mandate responsible data handling and prevent unauthorized disclosure or use of proprietary information. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the cost savings of using the new software without adequate safeguards would be professionally unacceptable. This would represent a failure to uphold ethical duties of care towards data subjects and intellectual property owners. Such an approach would likely violate data protection regulations, leading to potential legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of trust from clients and partners. Another incorrect approach that involves using the software for data analysis without understanding the underlying data's sensitivity or origin would also be a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the potential harm that could arise from mishandled sensitive information. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant stakeholders and their interests. This should be followed by a thorough assessment of the potential risks and benefits associated with each course of action, with a strong emphasis on ethical implications and regulatory compliance. A critical step is to consult relevant legal and compliance departments to ensure all decisions align with Nippon Printing's internal policies and external legal obligations. Finally, the decision should be documented, with clear reasoning that prioritizes long-term integrity and compliance over short-term expediency. Question 4. Process analysis reveals that a procurement manager at Nippon Printing is responsible for evaluating bids for a significant new printing technology contract. The manager discovers that one of the most competitive and technically suitable vendors is owned by their sibling. The manager has a close personal relationship with their sibling and is aware of the financial importance of this contract to the sibling's company. What is the most ethically sound and professionally responsible course of action for the procurement manager at Nippon Printing? Option A. Discreetly advocate for the siblings' company during the evaluation process, highlighting their strengths while downplaying potential weaknesses to ensure they secure the contract. Option B. Proceed with the evaluation as planned, ensuring the siblings' company is treated fairly, but do not disclose the relationship to avoid potential awkwardness or perceived bias against the sibling. Option C. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to their direct supervisor and the relevant ethics officer at Nippon Printing, and recuse themselves from any further involvement in the vendor selection process for this contract. Option D. Resign from their position at Nippon Printing to avoid any potential conflict of interest, without informing anyone about the specific reason for their resignation. The correct answer is C. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to their direct supervisor and the relevant ethics officer at Nippon Printing, and recuse themselves from any further involvement in the vendor selection process for this contract. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Nippon Printing due to the potential conflict between a personal relationship and professional responsibilities, which could lead to a breach of ethical conduct and company policy. Maintaining objectivity and fairness in business dealings is paramount. The correct approach involves immediate and transparent disclosure of the relationship to the appropriate authority within Nippon Printing. This upholds the company's code of conduct and regulatory expectations regarding conflicts of interest. By informing management, the employee allows the company to implement measures to mitigate any perceived or actual bias, ensuring that procurement decisions remain impartial and solely based on merit. This proactive step demonstrates integrity and adherence to ethical principles, safeguarding both the employees and the company's reputation. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the vendor selection process without disclosing the relationship. This failure to disclose creates an undisclosed conflict of interest, which is a direct violation of ethical standards and likely company policy. It undermines the integrity of the procurement process, potentially leading to decisions that are not in the best interest of Nippon Printing, such as selecting a less qualified or more expensive vendor due to the personal connection. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to subtly influence the decision in favor of the acquaintance's company. This is unethical and constitutes favoritism, compromising the fairness and transparency expected in business operations. It can lead to reputational damage for Nippon Printing and potential legal or regulatory repercussions if it is discovered that decisions were influenced by personal relationships rather than objective criteria. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to ignore the situation and hope it goes unnoticed. This passive stance is irresponsible and fails to address the inherent risk of a conflict of interest. It leaves Nippon Printing vulnerable to accusations of impropriety and can erode trust among employees and external partners. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a commitment to transparency, adherence to established policies, and a proactive approach to managing potential conflicts of interest to maintain the highest standards of business ethics. Question 5. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a new data analytics initiative for Nippon Printing could significantly improve operational efficiency and customer engagement, projecting substantial cost savings and revenue growth. However, the initiative involves processing customer data that, while anonymized according to current internal guidelines, might still be susceptible to re-identification under evolving data privacy regulations. The legal department has flagged potential compliance concerns, but the project team is eager to move forward due to the clear financial upside. What is the most ethically and legally sound course of action for Nippon Printing? Option A. Proceed with the initiative, but implement additional internal training for staff on data handling, assuming this will sufficiently address potential regulatory issues. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive, independent data privacy impact assessment, consult with external legal experts specializing in data protection, and implement enhanced anonymization and security protocols before proceeding, even if it delays the project and increases initial costs. Option C. Halt the initiative immediately and abandon the potential financial benefits due to the identified compliance concerns. Option D. Proceed with the initiative as planned, relying on current internal anonymization guidelines and the projected financial benefits while monitoring regulatory changes. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the initiative as planned, relying on current internal anonymization guidelines and the projected financial benefits while monitoring regulatory changes. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing potential financial gains against ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. The core dilemma lies in deciding whether to proceed with a project that offers significant benefits to Nippon Printing, but carries a risk of violating data privacy regulations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that short-term financial advantages do not lead to long-term reputational damage or legal repercussions. The correct approach involves prioritizing regulatory compliance and data privacy above immediate financial incentives. This means conducting a thorough risk assessment, seeking legal counsel, and implementing robust data protection measures before proceeding. If the risks to data privacy are deemed too high or cannot be adequately mitigated, the ethical and legally sound decision is to halt or significantly alter the project. This aligns with the principles of responsible business conduct and adherence to data protection laws, which are paramount in safeguarding customer trust and avoiding penalties. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the project without fully understanding or mitigating the data privacy risks, driven solely by the cost-benefit analysis. This demonstrates a disregard for regulatory frameworks and ethical responsibilities. Another incorrect approach would be to implement superficial data protection measures that do not genuinely safeguard sensitive information, attempting to appear compliant without substantive action. These approaches fail to uphold the integrity of data handling practices and expose Nippon printing to significant legal and reputational harm. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant legal and ethical obligations. This should be followed by a comprehensive risk assessment, including consultation with legal and compliance experts. The potential benefits should then be weighed against the identified risks and the cost of mitigation. If the risks cannot be effectively managed to meet regulatory standards, the decision should lean towards non-proceeding or significant modification, prioritizing long-term sustainability and ethical standing over short-term gains. Question 6. Upon reviewing a proposal for a new data analytics project for a key client, you notice that the scope of work involves the collection and analysis of customer data that may include personally identifiable information. While the client assures you that the data will be handled appropriately, you have a nagging concern about the specific data privacy regulations that might apply to this type of information and whether Nippon Printing's current processes are fully compliant. What is the most ethically and professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Proceed with the project as planned, trusting the client's assurance and assuming that existing internal guidelines are sufficient for data handling. Option B. Immediately halt the project and inform the client that Nippon Printing cannot proceed due to potential data privacy concerns without further investigation. Option C. Seek clarification from the client regarding their data privacy policies and the specific types of data being collected, and consult with Nippon Printing's legal and compliance departments to ensure full adherence to all relevant data protection regulations before commencing work. Option D. Proceed with the project, but make a note to address any potential data privacy issues only if they arise during the project's execution. Correct answer is A. Proceed with the project as planned, trusting the client's assurance and assuming that existing internal guidelines are sufficient for data handling. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with its long-term ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet targets can create a temptation to overlook or downplay potential issues. Careful judgment is required to ensure that actions taken are not only profitable, but also legally sound and ethically defensible, upholding the reputation and integrity of Nippon Printing. The correct approach involves proactively addressing the potential data privacy concerns by seeking clarification and ensuring compliance with relevant regulations before proceeding with the project. This demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory adherence, prioritizing the protection of sensitive information. This aligns with the principles of data protection and responsible business practices, which are often codified in regulations designed to safeguard individual privacy and prevent misuse of data. By seeking guidance and ensuring compliance, Nippon Printing avoids potential legal penalties, reputational damage, and erosion of client trust. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with the project without fully understanding the data privacy implications is ethically unsound and legally risky. This could lead to violations of data protection laws, resulting in significant fines and legal action. Another incorrect approach, which is to ignore the concerns and assume they are not significant, demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for potential risks. This can result in unforeseen complications and breaches of trust. Finally, an approach that involves attempting to obscure or minimize the data privacy risks to secure the contract would be a direct violation of ethical principles and potentially fraudulent, leading to severe consequences for both the individual and Nippon Printing. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical considerations and regulatory compliance. This involves identifying potential risks, seeking expert advice when necessary, and ensuring that all actions align with established codes of conduct and legal requirements. A proactive and transparent approach, even if it means a delay or adjustment to a project, is always preferable to the potential fallout from an ethical or legal breach. Question 7. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a minor, unconfirmed data exposure incident at Nippon Printing could be resolved internally with minimal immediate expense, potentially avoiding client notification and regulatory reporting that would incur significant costs and reputational damage. However, there is a non-zero risk that sensitive client information may have been accessed. What is the most ethically and professionally responsible course of action for the employee discovering this potential incident? Option A. Proceed with the internal resolution, assuming the risk is low and the cost-benefit analysis favors avoiding external notification to protect Nippon Printing's immediate financial standing and reputation. Option B. Conduct a more thorough, but still internal, investigation to definitively prove no data was accessed before reporting, to avoid unnecessary alarm and costs if the incident is ultimately benign. Option C. Inform senior management of the cost-benefit analysis and seek their directive on how to proceed, prioritizing their financial and strategic guidance. Option D. Immediately report the potential incident internally to the designated compliance officer and data security team, following Nippon Printing's established incident response protocol, regardless of the cost-benefit analysis. The correct answer is D. Immediately report the potential incident internally to the designated compliance officer and data security team, following Nippon Printing's established incident response protocol, regardless of the cost-benefit analysis. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it forces a decision between potential short-term financial gains and long-term ethical integrity and regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet financial targets can create a conflict of interest, requiring careful judgment to uphold Nippon Printing's reputation and adhere to its ethical standards. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparency and adherence to Nippon Printing's internal code of conduct and any relevant industry regulations regarding data handling and client confidentiality. This means acknowledging the potential data breach, even if it incurs immediate costs, and taking proactive steps to mitigate harm and inform affected parties as required by Nippon Printing's policies and applicable laws. This approach is ethically sound, as it respects the rights of individuals whose data may be compromised and aligns with principles of corporate responsibility. It also preempts potential regulatory penalties and reputational damage that could arise from a delayed or concealed response. An incorrect approach would be to downplay the significance of the potential data breach to avoid immediate financial repercussions. This could involve attempting to rectify the issue internally without informing relevant stakeholders or regulators, or even deliberately concealing the incident. Such actions would violate ethical principles of honesty and accountability. From a regulatory standpoint, depending on the jurisdiction and the nature of the data, failing to report a data breach could lead to severe fines, legal action, and irreparable damage to Nippon Printing's credibility. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with the cost-benefit analysis as the sole determinant of action, prioritizing financial savings over the ethical and legal obligations to protect client data and maintain trust. This utilitarian approach, when applied to data privacy and security, often leads to a disregard for fundamental rights and regulatory mandates. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all potential ethical and legal obligations. This involves consulting Nippon Printing's internal policies, relevant industry codes of conduct, and applicable data protection laws. The next step is to assess the potential impact of each course of action on all stakeholders, including clients, employees, and the company's reputation. Finally, the decision should be made based on a commitment to integrity, transparency, and compliance, even if it entails short-term financial costs. Question 8. The control framework reveals that Nippon Printing sales team is under significant pressure to meet quarterly targets. An employee discovers that a substantial deal, crucial for meeting the target, has a high probability of falling through due to unforeseen client issues, which would result in the target being missed. The employee is aware that delaying the reporting of this risk could allow the target to appear met for the current quarter, potentially avoiding immediate scrutiny. What is the most ethically and regulatorily sound approach for the employee to take? Option A. Discreetly adjust the sales forecast to reflect a more conservative outlook without explicitly mentioning the specific deal's risk to senior management. Option B. Discuss the situation with colleagues to gauge their opinions on how to best present the information to management without causing alarm. Option C. Immediately report the potential risk to the deal's viability to senior management and the compliance department, recommending a revised forecast based on the updated information. Option D. Proceed with reporting the deal as closed to meet the quarterly target, hoping the client issues resolve themselves before the next reporting period. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the potential risk to the deal's viability to senior management and the compliance department, recommending a revised forecast based on the updated information. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with its long-term ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet targets can create an environment where shortcuts are tempting, but adherence to ethical principles and regulatory guidelines is paramount. Careful judgment is needed to navigate the conflict between perceived short-term gains and the potential for significant long-term damage to Dai Nippon Printing's reputation and legal standing. The correct approach involves a commitment to transparency and accurate reporting, even when it means acknowledging a shortfall. This aligns with the ethical duty of integrity and the regulatory requirement for truthful financial disclosures. By immediately escalating the issue to senior management and the compliance department, the employee demonstrates a proactive and responsible stance. This allows Dai Nippon Printing to address the situation appropriately, whether through internal adjustments, revised forecasts, or transparent communication with stakeholders, thereby mitigating potential regulatory penalties and maintaining stakeholder trust. An incorrect approach would be to attempt to manipulate the data to meet the target. This constitutes a breach of ethical conduct, specifically honesty and integrity, and directly violates regulations requiring accurate financial reporting. Such actions can lead to severe consequences, including fines, legal action, and reputational damage for both the individual and Dai Nippon Printing. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the discrepancy and hope it goes unnoticed. This demonstrates a lack of professional responsibility and a failure to uphold ethical standards. It also exposes Dai Nippon Printing to regulatory scrutiny and potential penalties if the discrepancy is discovered later, as it suggests a systemic issue with internal controls or a deliberate attempt to mislead. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a clear understanding of the company's code of conduct, relevant regulations, and ethical principles. When faced with a conflict between performance targets and accurate reporting, the professional should prioritize ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. This involves documenting the issue, seeking guidance from appropriate internal channels, such as a supervisor, compliance officer, or legal department, and advocating for a transparent and compliant resolution. The focus should always be on upholding the integrity of the company's operations and its reporting. Question 9. Examination of the data shows that a Dai Nippon Printing employee, while reviewing internal financial projections for an upcoming product launch, discovers a significant, previously undisclosed positive development that is highly likely to impact the company's stock price once publicly announced. The employee has a personal brokerage account and is aware of the timing of the public announcement. What is the most ethically and legally sound course of action for the Dai Nippon Printing employee? Option A. Use the information to make a personal investment in Dai Nippon Printing stock before the public announcement. Option B. Keep the information confidential and wait for the public announcement before considering any personal investment decisions. Option C. Discuss the information with a close friend who is an experienced investor, suggesting they consider investing in Dai Nippon Printing. Option D. Immediately refrain from any trading activity related to Dai Nippon Printing stock and report the information to the company's compliance department. The correct answer is D. Immediately refrain from any trading activity related to Dai Nippon Printing stock and report the information to the company's compliance department. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Dai Nippon Printing due to the potential conflict between personal gain and the company's ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. The core of the dilemma lies in the employee's access to sensitive, non-public information that could be leveraged for personal financial benefit. Navigating this requires a strong understanding of insider trading regulations and the company's internal code of conduct. Careful judgment is essential to avoid actions that could lead to legal repercussions for both the individual and Dai Nippon Printing, as well as damage to the company's reputation. The correct approach involves immediately reporting the potential insider information to the designated compliance officer or legal department within Dai Nippon Printing. This upholds the principle of acting in the best interest of the company and adhering to regulatory frameworks designed to ensure fair and transparent markets. Specifically, this aligns with the spirit and letter of regulations prohibiting insider trading, which are designed to prevent individuals from profiting unfairly from material non-public information. By reporting, the employee demonstrates integrity and a commitment to ethical conduct, thereby protecting themselves and the company from potential legal and reputational harm. An incorrect approach would be to use the information to make a personal investment. This directly violates insider trading laws and ethical codes, as it constitutes profiting from privileged information not available to the general public. Such an action would expose the employee to severe penalties, including fines and imprisonment, and would also subject Dai Nippon Printing to regulatory scrutiny, potential fines, and significant reputational damage. Another incorrect approach would be to discuss the information with a trusted friend or family member who might then make an investment. This is known as tipping and is also a violation of insider trading regulations. The employee would still be considered the source of the illegal advantage, and both the employee and the recipient of the tip could face legal consequences. This action breaches confidentiality and the duty of loyalty owed to Dai Nippon Printing. A third incorrect approach would be to ignore the information and take no action. While seemingly passive, this can still be problematic. If the employee has a duty to report such information, as is common in many corporate environments, failing to do so could be seen as a dereliction of duty and could still lead to negative consequences if the information later becomes public and the employee is found to have been aware of it and done nothing. It also misses an opportunity to proactively address a potential compliance issue. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of one's ethical obligations and the relevant regulatory framework. When faced with information that seems sensitive or could provide an unfair advantage, the first step should always be to consult the company's code of conduct and relevant policies. If there is any doubt, the safest and most ethical course of action is to err on the side of caution and report the information to the appropriate internal authority, such as the compliance department or legal counsel. This proactive reporting demonstrates good faith and allows the company to manage the situation appropriately, protecting all stakeholders. Question 10. Assessment of an employee at Dai Nippon Printing who, while reviewing upcoming financial reports, discovers a significant, undisclosed positive development that is expected to substantially increase the company's stock price. The employee has a personal brokerage account and is considering purchasing additional shares of Dai Nippon Printing stock before the information is publicly released. Option A. Discuss the upcoming financial development with a close family member who is also an investor, suggesting they consider investing in Dai Nippon Printing. Option B. Ignore the information and continue with their regular duties, assuming that the market will eventually reflect the company's true value without any personal action. Option C. Purchase additional shares of Dai Nippon Printing stock in their personal brokerage account, believing it is a prudent investment opportunity based on their privileged knowledge. Option D. Immediately report the discovery of the material non-public information to the Dai Nippon Printing Compliance Department and refrain from any personal trading until the information is publicly disclosed. The correct answer is D. Immediately report the discovery of the material non-public information to the Dai Nippon Printing Compliance Department and refrain from any personal trading until the information is publicly disclosed. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Dai Nippon Printing due to the potential conflict between personal gain and the company's ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. The core of the dilemma lies in the employee's access to sensitive, non-public information that could be leveraged for personal financial benefit. Navigating this requires a strong understanding of insider trading regulations and the company's internal code of conduct. The correct approach involves immediately reporting the potential insider information to the appropriate compliance department or designated authority within Dai Nippon Printing. This upholds the principle of fiduciary duty, which requires employees to act in the best interests of the company and its stakeholders. Specifically, it aligns with the regulatory framework that prohibits the misuse of material non-public information for personal gain, thereby preventing market manipulation and ensuring fair trading practices. By reporting, the employee demonstrates integrity and adherence to both legal requirements and ethical standards, safeguarding themselves and the company from potential legal repercussions and reputational damage. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the stock purchase based on the non-public information. This directly violates insider trading laws, which are designed to maintain market integrity. Such an action would constitute a breach of trust and a failure to act in the company's best interest, potentially leading to severe penalties, including fines and imprisonment, as well as disciplinary action from Dai Nippon Printing. Another incorrect approach would be to discuss the information with a close friend or family member, who might then trade on it. Not directly trading oneself, tipping off others constitutes insider trading as well. This is a violation of the same principles of market fairness and fiduciary duty, as it facilitates the illicit use of material non-public information and exposes Dai Nippon Printing to significant risk. A third incorrect approach would be to ignore the information and take no action, hoping it will not be discovered. This passive approach is still professionally negligent. It fails to address a known ethical and regulatory risk, leaving the company vulnerable. Professional responsibility demands proactive engagement with potential compliance issues, not avoidance. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a clear understanding of the company's policies on information handling and trading, as well as relevant securities laws. When faced with a potential conflict of interest or the possibility of possessing material non-public information, the immediate and paramount step is to seek guidance from the company's compliance or legal department. This ensures that any actions taken are in full accordance with regulatory requirements and ethical standards, prioritizing the integrity of the financial markets and the reputation of Dai Nippon Printing. Question 11. Which approach would be most appropriate for Dai Nippon Printing when considering a potential strategic partnership that could leverage insights derived from anonymized client data, while ensuring strict adherence to confidentiality and data protection principles? Option A. Share anonymized client data with potential partners to demonstrate the value proposition and secure the partnership, assuming the anonymization process is robust. Option B. Decline the partnership if there is any perceived risk, however small, of client data being compromised, even if anonymized. Option C. Proceed with the partnership after conducting a comprehensive review of data anonymization techniques and obtaining explicit consent for the use of anonymized data, ensuring no identifiable client information is ever shared. Option D. Initiate discussions with potential partners about the partnership opportunity, with the understanding that detailed client data will be shared once the partnership is finalized and non-disclosure agreements are in place. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the partnership after conducting a comprehensive review of data anonymization techniques and obtaining explicit consent for the use of anonymized data, ensuring no identifiable client information is ever shared. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Dai Nippon Printing due to the inherent conflict between a potential business opportunity and the ethical obligations to protect sensitive client information. The need for careful judgment arises from the potential for reputational damage, legal repercussions, and erosion of client trust if confidential data is mishandled. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the pursuit of new business with the paramount duty of confidentiality. The correct approach involves prioritizing the safeguarding of client data above all else, even if it means forgoing a potentially lucrative contract. This aligns with fundamental ethical principles of data privacy and professional integrity, which are implicitly expected in any business context, especially when dealing with proprietary information. While specific regulations for Dai Nippon Printing's hiring assessment test are not provided, the general expectation in professional environments, particularly in industries handling sensitive data, is adherence to strict confidentiality agreements and data protection standards. This approach demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and long-term business sustainability, which is crucial for maintaining client relationships and market standing. An incorrect approach that involves sharing preliminary, non-public client data to gauge interest from potential partners would be professionally unacceptable. This action would constitute a breach of confidentiality, violating implicit or explicit agreements with the client and potentially exposing Dai Nippon Printing to legal action and severe reputational harm. Another incorrect approach, which is to proceed with the partnership without a thorough data security assessment, ignores the inherent risks associated with data handling and could lead to inadvertent data leaks or misuse, again resulting in significant ethical and legal consequences. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on the potential financial gain without adequately considering the ethical implications and risks to client data demonstrates a lack of professional responsibility and foresight, which is detrimental to the company's long-term success and trustworthiness. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all stakeholders and their interests, followed by a thorough risk assessment of each potential course of action. This should include evaluating the ethical implications, legal ramifications, and potential impact on reputation and client trust. When faced with a conflict between business opportunity and ethical obligations, the framework dictates that ethical considerations and the protection of sensitive information must always take precedence. A robust due diligence process, including legal and ethical review, should be a mandatory step before committing to any new venture, especially when client data is involved. Question 12. Implementation of a new data analytics project at Nippon Printing has revealed a pattern of unusual transactions associated with a key client. While the data itself is not conclusive proof of wrongdoing, it raises concerns about potential noncompliance with industry regulations. An employee notices this anomaly and is unsure of the best course of action. Which of the following approaches best upholds Nippon Printing's commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory adherence? Option A. Discuss the observed anomaly and suspicions with other colleagues in the department to gather their opinions before taking any action. Option B. Immediately report the observed anomaly and the associated concerns to Nippon Printing's compliance department or designated whistleblowing channel. Option C. Continue with the data analytics project, assuming the transactions are legitimate until definitive proof of misconduct is found. Option D. Directly approach the client to inquire about the unusual transactions, seeking clarification before involving internal departments. Correct answer is B. Immediately report the observed anomaly and the associated concerns to Nippon Printing's compliance department or designated whistleblowing channel. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Nippon Printing employees due to the inherent conflict between maintaining client confidentiality and the ethical obligation to report potential misconduct. Navigating this requires a deep understanding of the company's internal policies and relevant regulatory frameworks, which are paramount in ensuring trust and integrity. Careful judgment is essential to balance these competing interests without jeopardizing client relationships or violating legal and ethical standards. The correct approach involves prioritizing the reporting of potential misconduct through established internal channels, such as the compliance department or a designated whistleblowing hotline. This aligns with Nippon Printing's commitment to ethical business practices and regulatory compliance. Specifically, this approach is justified by the overarching principle of corporate responsibility, which mandates that employees act in the best interest of the company and its stakeholders by proactively addressing potential breaches of conduct. Such reporting mechanisms are designed to facilitate an independent and impartial investigation, thereby protecting both the company and its clients from harm. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the potential misconduct, fearing repercussions, or prioritizing the immediate preservation of the client relationship. This failure stems from a disregard for the company's ethical code and potentially applicable regulations that require reporting of suspicious activities. It risks enabling further misconduct, damaging Nippon Printing's reputation, and exposing the company to legal liabilities. Another incorrect approach would be to directly confront the client without proper authorization or guidance from the compliance department. This bypasses established procedures and could escalate the situation unnecessarily, potentially leading to legal complications or the destruction of evidence. It demonstrates a lack of understanding of internal protocols and the importance of a structured investigation process. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to discuss the potential misconduct with colleagues outside of the designated reporting channels. This constitutes a breach of confidentiality and could lead to the spread of misinformation, prejudicing any future investigation and potentially implicating innocent parties. It undermines the integrity of the reporting process and demonstrates poor professional judgment. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve: first, recognizing the potential issue and its implications. Second, consulting Nippon Printing's internal policies and code of conduct. Third, reporting the concern through the appropriate, confidential channels. And fourth, cooperating fully with any subsequent investigation while maintaining discretion and professional integrity. Question 13. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a new AI-powered recruitment software for Nippon Printing offers significant cost reductions in candidate screening. However, preliminary reviews suggest the software may not fully comply with the data privacy regulations stipulated by the Nippon Printing Hiring Assessment Test Framework, and its energy consumption is higher than current systems, which approach best balances the potential financial gains with regulatory and ethical responsibilities. Option A. Implement the new software but allocate a portion of the projected cost savings to a contingency fund for potential fines related to data privacy or environmental noncompliance. Option B. Conduct a thorough due diligence process to assess the software's compliance with all relevant data privacy regulations and environmental guidelines specified by the Nippon Printing Hiring Assessment Test Framework, and explore mitigation strategies for any identified gaps before implementation. Option C. Implement the new software immediately to realize cost savings and address any potential regulatory or environmental issues reactively as they arise. Option D. Reject the new software solely based on the potential for future regulatory issues and environmental concerns, prioritizing the status quo despite the identified cost benefits. Correct answer is C. Implement the new software immediately to realize cost savings and address any potential regulatory or environmental issues reactively as they arise. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because Nippon Printing, as a publicly listed entity, must balance the financial benefits of a new technology with its obligations to various stakeholders, including shareholders, employees, and the broader community. The decision requires careful judgment to ensure compliance with relevant regulations and ethical considerations, particularly concerning data privacy and environmental impact, which are increasingly scrutinized. The correct approach involves prioritizing regulatory compliance and ethical considerations over immediate cost savings. This means thoroughly assessing the new technology's adherence to the Nippon Printing Hiring Assessment Test's specified regulatory framework, which likely includes guidelines on fair hiring practices, data protection e.g., personal information handling, and environmental sustainability. A comprehensive risk assessment, including potential legal liabilities and reputational damage from noncompliance, should inform the decision. This approach ensures that Nippon Printing acts responsibly, maintains stakeholder trust, and avoids costly penalties or future remediation efforts. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on the cost savings identified in the cost-benefit analysis without adequately investigating the regulatory implications. This could lead to the adoption of technology that violates data privacy laws, leading to significant fines and legal challenges. Another incorrect approach would be to overlook the environmental impact of the new technology, potentially contravening sustainability regulations or corporate social responsibility commitments, which could damage Nippon Printing's reputation and alienate environmentally conscious stakeholders. A third incorrect approach would be to proceed with the technology based on a superficial understanding of its operational benefits, ignoring potential ethical concerns related to bias in AI-driven assessments, which could lead to discriminatory hiring practices and legal repercussions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that integrates financial analysis with robust due diligence on regulatory compliance, ethical implications, and stakeholder impact. This involves forming cross-functional teams to review the technology from legal, HR, IT, and sustainability perspectives. Prioritizing a thorough risk assessment and seeking expert legal and ethical counsel before making a final decision is crucial. The framework should also include mechanisms for ongoing monitoring and evaluation of the technology's performance against regulatory and ethical standards. Question 14. During the evaluation of a potential new contract with a key supplier, a senior manager at Nippon Printing discovers that their spouse is a significant shareholder in a competing firm that is also bidding for the same contract. The manager is responsible for the final recommendation on which supplier to award the contract. What is the most appropriate course of action for the senior manager to ensure Nippon Printing adheres to its ethical obligations and relevant hiring assessment test guidelines? Option A. Immediately disclose the personal relationship and potential conflict of interest to the relevant internal stakeholders and the procurement committee, and recuse themselves from the decision-making process for this contract. Option B. Continue with the evaluation and recommendation process, but make a note in the internal documentation about the personal relationship without formally disclosing it to external parties involved in the bidding. Option C. Proceed with the evaluation and recommendation, assuming the personal relationship will not influence their professional judgment, and focus solely on the merits of the supplier's proposal. Option D. Discreetly inquire with the competing firm's management, through informal channels, about their bid strategy to better understand the competitive landscape before making a recommendation. The correct answer is A. Immediately disclose the personal relationship and potential conflict of interest to the relevant internal stakeholders and the procurement committee, and recuse themselves from the decision-making process for this contract. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate financial interests of Nippon Printing with its long-term ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. The pressure to secure a new contract can lead to overlooking potential conflicts of interest, which are strictly regulated to ensure fair market practices and protect stakeholders. Careful judgment is required to navigate these pressures while adhering to the highest ethical standards and the specific regulatory framework governing business conduct. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent disclosure of the potential conflict of interest to the relevant internal and external parties. This demonstrates integrity and adherence to principles of good corporate governance. Specifically, it aligns with the spirit and letter of regulations that mandate disclosure of relationships that could influence decision-making, thereby preventing any perception of impropriety or unfair advantage. This approach safeguards the reputation of Nippon Printing and fosters trust among all stakeholders. An incorrect approach that prioritizes securing the contract without disclosure fails to acknowledge the regulatory imperative to prevent conflicts of interest. This can lead to accusations of unethical behavior and potential legal repercussions for Nippon Printing, as it undermines the integrity of the bidding process. Another incorrect approach, which involves seeking informal advice from a competitor, is professionally unsound and ethically dubious. It risks breaching confidentiality, misrepresenting Nippon Printing's intentions, and potentially exposing the company to legal liabilities for attempting to gain an unfair advantage through improper channels. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential conflicts of interest. This should be followed by a thorough understanding of the applicable regulatory requirements and internal company policies regarding disclosure and conflict management. When a conflict is identified, the immediate step should be to consult with legal or compliance departments and to disclose the conflict to all affected parties in a timely and transparent manner. This structured approach ensures that decisions are made ethically and in compliance with all relevant laws and guidelines, prioritizing long-term integrity over short-term gains. Question 15. Quality control measures reveal a minor but consistent deviation from the specified ink density on a batch of printed materials intended for a regulated industry. The production deadline for this batch is imminent, and addressing the deviation would likely cause a significant delay. As a Nippon Printing quality assurance officer, what is the most appropriate immediate action to take? Option A. Immediately halt production of the affected batch. Formally report the deviation to the relevant internal quality and regulatory compliance departments and await further instructions. Option B. Inform the client about the minor deviation and seek their approval to proceed with the shipment, explaining the potential delay if it is not approved. Option C. Proceed with the shipment of the batch, documenting the deviation for future review and planning to address it in the next production run. Option D. Instruct the production team to adjust the ink density slightly to meet the specification without halting production, assuming the deviation is within an acceptable tolerance. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the shipment of the batch, documenting the deviation for future review and planning to address it in the next production run. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Nippon Printing employees due to the inherent conflict between maintaining product quality and adhering to strict regulatory timelines. The pressure to meet deadlines can tempt individuals to overlook minor deviations, but the regulatory framework for printing and manufacturing mandates rigorous quality checks to ensure compliance and public safety. Careful judgment is required to balance efficiency with the non-negotiable standards set by the regulatory body. The correct approach involves immediately escalating the identified quality issue to the relevant internal department and halting production of the affected batch until the problem is resolved and re-verified. This aligns with the principles of product stewardship and regulatory compliance. Nippon Printing, as a responsible manufacturer, is obligated by the regulatory framework to produce goods that meet specified standards. Failing to address a quality defect promptly and transparently could lead to product recalls, reputational damage, and significant penalties under the governing regulations. This proactive stance demonstrates a commitment to ethical business practices and adherence to legal requirements. An incorrect approach of attempting to conceal or downplay the quality issue to meet the deadline would be a severe regulatory and ethical failure. This action directly contravenes the spirit and letter of quality control regulations, which are designed to prevent substandard products from reaching the market. Such a decision could expose Nippon Printing to legal liabilities, fines, and loss of trust from its clients and consumers. Another incorrect approach, that of proceeding with production while intending to fix the issue later without proper documentation or revalidation, also represents a significant failure. This bypasses established quality assurance protocols and creates a risk of defective products entering the supply chain. It undermines the integrity of the manufacturing process and violates the principle of right first time quality, which is implicitly or explicitly required by most regulatory frameworks governing manufacturing. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a clear understanding of the company's internal quality policies and the external regulatory requirements. When a discrepancy is identified, the immediate priority should be to report it through the designated channels. Professionals must be empowered to raise concerns without fear of reprisal and understand that adherence to quality standards and regulations supersedes short-term production targets. A robust internal reporting system and a culture that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance are crucial for navigating these challenges effectively. Question 16. Performance analysis shows that Nippon Printing's recent quarterly results have fallen short of internal projections, particularly in key growth segments. As a senior manager, what is the most appropriate initial step to take regarding this performance analysis from a stakeholder perspective? Option A. Focus solely on highlighting the positive aspects of the performance analysis in all external communications to maintain investor confidence. Option B. Dismiss the performance analysis as an anomaly and continue with existing business strategies without further investigation. Option C. Immediately communicate the full performance analysis, including the shortfalls, to relevant internal teams and begin developing a detailed, fact-based action plan for improvement. Option D. Present the performance analysis to stakeholders in a generalized, optimistic tone that avoids specific details about the shortfalls. The correct answer is C. Immediately communicate the full performance analysis, including the shortfalls, to relevant internal teams and begin developing a detailed, fact-based action plan for improvement. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Nippon Printing, as a publicly listed company, operates under stringent regulatory oversight. Stakeholders, including shareholders, employees, and the public, expect transparency and ethical conduct. Misrepresenting performance data, even with the intention of managing expectations, can lead to serious consequences, including regulatory penalties, loss of investor confidence, and damage to the company's reputation. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the need to communicate performance effectively with the absolute requirement for factual accuracy and adherence to disclosure rules. The correct approach involves transparently communicating the performance analysis, including any identified shortfalls, to relevant internal stakeholders, and then developing a clear, fact-based action plan to address these issues. This approach aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and regulatory compliance. Specifically, it upholds the ethical duty of honesty and integrity in reporting. From a regulatory perspective, it ensures that Nippon Printing is not engaging in misleading statements or omissions, which could violate securities laws and stock exchange listing rules. By focusing on actionable solutions, it demonstrates a commitment to improvement and responsible management, which is what stakeholders expect and what regulators mandate. An incorrect approach would be to selectively present only positive aspects of the performance analysis, while omitting or downplaying negative trends. This constitutes a failure of transparency and can be interpreted as misleading stakeholders. Ethically, it breaches the duty of candor. Regulatorily, it could lead to accusations of market manipulation or providing false and misleading information to investors, potentially resulting in fines and sanctions. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately dismiss the performance analysis as irrelevant without proper investigation or consideration. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for potential underlying issues that could impact the company's future performance and stakeholder interests. Ethically, it shows a failure to take responsibility for performance. Regulatorily, it could mean missing critical signals that require disclosure or corrective action, leading to non-compliance. A further incorrect approach would be to communicate the performance analysis in a vague or overly optimistic manner that obscures the actual situation. This is a form of obfuscation that, while not outright falsehood, fails to provide stakeholders with the clear and accurate information they are entitled to. Ethically, it erodes trust. Regulatorily, it can be seen as an attempt to circumvent disclosure obligations by providing information that is technically true but practically misleading. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough and objective review of all performance data. This should be followed by an assessment of the implications of the findings, considering both internal operational impacts and external stakeholder expectations. Crucially, any communication regarding performance must be grounded in factual accuracy and adhere strictly to all applicable regulatory disclosure requirements. Developing concrete, well-defined action plans to address identified issues is paramount. When in doubt, seeking guidance from legal and compliance departments is essential to ensure adherence to all regulatory and ethical standards. Question 17. The audit findings indicate that certain data processing activities at Dai Nippon Printing may not fully comply with the Personal Information Protection Act, (PIPA) of Japan. Specifically, the audit highlights concerns regarding the consent mechanisms for collecting sensitive personal information from customers. Considering the strict requirements of PIPA, which of the following actions should Dai Nippon Printing prioritize to address these findings? Option A. Implement minor adjustments to the consent forms based on the audit team's preliminary suggestions, assuming these adjustments will satisfy PIPA requirements without further legal consultation. Option B. Immediately cease all data processing activities involving sensitive personal information until a comprehensive review of consent mechanisms is completed and compliant procedures are implemented. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the audit findings, cross-reference them with the specific provisions of PIPA concerning consent for sensitive personal information, and consult with Dai Nippon Printing's legal and compliance teams to develop a remediation plan. Option D. Issue a public statement acknowledging potential issues and assuring customers that the company is investigating, without detailing the specific regulatory concerns or planned actions. The correct answer is B. Immediately cease all data processing activities involving sensitive personal information until a comprehensive review of consent mechanisms is completed and compliant procedures are implemented. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Dai Nippon Printing's internal audit has identified potential noncompliance with regulatory requirements related to data privacy and security. The challenge lies in balancing the need for immediate corrective action with the imperative to adhere strictly to the established regulatory framework governing data handling and reporting. Misinterpreting or misapplying these regulations could lead to further breaches, significant penalties, and reputational damage for Dai Nippon Printing. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any response is both effective and compliant. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the audit findings against the specific data protection regulations applicable to Dai Nippon Printing's operations. This includes understanding the scope of the identified issues, the precise nature of the noncompliance, and the prescribed remediation steps outlined in the relevant laws and guidelines. By engaging with legal and compliance experts within Dai Nippon Printing and potentially external advisors, the company can ensure that its response is legally sound, ethically responsible, and aligned with the principles of data protection. This proactive and informed engagement with the regulatory framework is crucial for mitigating risks and demonstrating a commitment to compliance. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the audit findings without a proper investigation, assuming the issues are minor or can be resolved informally. This fails to acknowledge the seriousness of potential regulatory breaches and could lead to continued noncompliance, exposing Dai Nippon Printing to fines and legal action. Another incorrect approach would be to implement corrective actions without consulting the relevant regulatory guidelines or seeking expert advice. This might result in ineffective solutions that do not address the root cause of the noncompliance or, worse, introduce new compliance risks. Finally, attempting to conceal or downplay the findings to stakeholders without a clear plan for remediation would be a severe ethical and regulatory failure, undermining trust, and potentially leading to more significant consequences if discovered. Professionals should approach such situations by first ensuring a comprehensive understanding of the audit report and the specific regulations cited. This should be followed by a structured risk assessment to prioritize the identified issues. Consultation with internal legal and compliance departments is paramount. If necessary, external expertise should be sought to interpret complex regulatory requirements. The decision-making process should prioritize transparency with relevant internal stakeholders and a clear, documented plan for remediation that is demonstrably aligned with regulatory obligations. Question 18. Cost-benefit analysis shows that engaging a new, unvetted supplier for a critical component could significantly reduce production costs for Nippon printing. However, this supplier's pricing appears unusually low, raising concerns about potential quality issues or unethical sourcing practices. What is the most professionally responsible course of action for the procurement manager at Nippon Printing? Option A. Accept the new supplier's offer immediately to capitalize on the cost savings and address any potential issues that arise after the contract is signed. Option B. Negotiate aggressively with existing, reputable suppliers to match the new supplier's price, even if it means accepting lower profit margins for them. Option C. Conduct thorough due diligence on the new supplier, including verifying their ethical sourcing practices and quality control measures, even if it delays the cost-saving initiative. Option D. Proceed with the new supplier if the cost savings are substantial, assuming the risk of quality issues is manageable and can be addressed later. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the new supplier if the cost savings are substantial, assuming the risk of quality issues is manageable and can be addressed later. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Nippon Printing employees due to the inherent conflict between maximizing immediate financial gains and upholding long-term ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. The pressure to achieve cost savings through potentially questionable means requires careful judgment to ensure that decisions align with both internal policies and external legal frameworks. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparency and adherence to established procurement regulations, even if it means foregoing immediate cost reductions. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and ethical business practices, which are implicitly expected of employees in any reputable organization, including Nippon Printing. Specifically, it upholds the regulatory expectation of fair and transparent dealings with suppliers, preventing any appearance of impropriety or undue influence. This approach ensures that the company's reputation is protected and that it avoids potential legal repercussions or sanctions that could arise from circumventing proper procedures. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on achieving the lowest price without considering the integrity of the procurement process is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to regulatory failures by violating principles of fair competition and potentially engaging in practices that are considered corrupt or unethical, even if not explicitly illegal in every instance. Such an approach risks damaging supplier relationships, exposing Nippon Printing to reputational damage, and potentially attracting scrutiny from regulatory bodies concerned with market integrity. Another incorrect approach that involves pressuring suppliers to offer discounts under duress, without a genuine basis for negotiation or a transparent process, is also professionally unsound. This undermines the principle of arm's-length transactions and can create an environment where suppliers feel exploited. Ethically, it erodes trust and can lead to long-term negative consequences for the company's supply chain stability and its standing within the industry. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of Nippon Printing's internal code of conduct and relevant procurement laws. Employees should be encouraged to seek guidance from legal or compliance departments when faced with ethical dilemmas or situations where cost-saving measures might conflict with regulatory requirements. A framework that emphasizes due diligence, fairness, and transparency in all business dealings, coupled with a commitment to ethical conduct, is essential for navigating these challenges effectively. Question 19. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a new, less rigorous quality control process at Nippon Printing could significantly reduce operational expenses. However, this process might slightly increase the risk of minor product defects reaching customers, which could lead to a small rise in customer complaints and potential warranty claims over time. Considering the potential for immediate cost savings versus the long-term impact on customer satisfaction and brand reputation, which approach best aligns with responsible business practices for Dai Nippon Printing? Option A. Reject the new quality control process, prioritizing the current level of quality and customer satisfaction, even if it means foregoing immediate cost reduction opportunities. Option B. Implement the new quality control process, but proactively communicate the slight increase in defect risk to customers beforehand, offering a discount on future purchases to mitigate potential dissatisfaction. Option C. Proceed with the new quality control process, focusing on the immediate cost savings, and assuming the increase in complaints will be manageable and offset by the reduced operational expenses. Option D. Explore alternative cost-saving measures within Dai Nippon Printing that do not compromise product quality or customer trust, even if these alternatives offer less immediate financial benefit. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the new quality control process, focusing on the immediate cost savings, and assuming the increase in complaints will be manageable and offset by the reduced operational expenses. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for Dai Nippon Printing employees due to the inherent conflict between maximizing immediate financial gains and upholding long-term ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. The pressure to achieve cost savings through potentially questionable means requires careful judgment to balance business objectives with stakeholder trust and legal obligations. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparency and adherence to Dai Nippon Printing's internal code of conduct, which would likely align with general principles of corporate responsibility and fair dealing. This approach is right because it ensures that any cost-saving measures are implemented ethically and legally, thereby safeguarding the company's reputation and avoiding potential legal repercussions. Specifically, it aligns with the expectation that companies operate with integrity and respect for all parties involved in their business dealings, which is a fundamental tenet of responsible corporate governance, and often implicitly or explicitly required by industry-specific regulations and ethical guidelines that govern hiring assessments. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the cost savings without considering the ethical implications or potential regulatory breaches would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the principles of fair competition and honest business practices, which are often codified in regulations designed to prevent fraud, misrepresentation, and unfair advantages. Another incorrect approach that involves circumventing established procurement processes or contractual obligations to achieve cost reductions would violate principles of good corporate governance and potentially breach contractual agreements, leading to legal disputes and reputational damage. Such actions would also contravene the spirit of regulatory frameworks that promote fair and orderly markets. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant stakeholders and their interests. This should be followed by a thorough assessment of potential action against Dai Nippon Printing's internal policies, ethical guidelines, and any applicable external regulations. When faced with a conflict, seeking guidance from legal counsel or compliance departments is crucial. The decision should always favor the option that upholds integrity, transparency, and long-term sustainability over short-term financial gains achieved through questionable means. Question 20. The risk matrix shows a potential unauthorized access incident involving customer personal data at Dai Nippon Printing. Which of the following actions best aligns with a responsible and compliant approach to managing this situation? Option A. Conduct a preliminary internal review to gauge the severity and decide whether to disclose the incident based on potential reputational impact. Option B. Focus on strengthening internal security protocols and patching vulnerabilities before assessing the full extent of the breach or considering external notifications. Option C. Immediately initiate a comprehensive data breach impact assessment to determine the scope, nature, and potential harm to individuals, and consult with legal counsel to ascertain regulatory notification obligations. Option D. Inform relevant regulatory bodies of a potential incident without a detailed impact assessment to ensure timely reporting. The correct answer is C. Immediately initiate a comprehensive data breach impact assessment to determine the scope, nature, and potential harm to individuals, and consult with legal counsel to ascertain regulatory notification obligations. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Dai Nippon Printing is facing a potential breach of data privacy regulations, specifically concerning the handling of customer information. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for internal risk assessment and improvement with the legal and ethical obligations to protect sensitive data and report breaches appropriately. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the response is both effective in mitigating future risks and compliant with all applicable laws. The correct approach involves a thorough impact assessment that prioritizes regulatory compliance and customer notification. This approach is right because it directly addresses the potential harm to individuals whose data may have been compromised, a key consideration under data protection laws. By systematically evaluating the scope, nature, and potential consequences of the data exposure, Dai Nippon Printing can determine the appropriate level of response, including mandatory reporting to regulatory authorities and notification to affected individuals, as stipulated by data privacy frameworks. This proactive and compliant stance minimizes legal repercussions and upholds customer trust. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on internal remediation without immediate consideration for regulatory obligations would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from neglecting the legal mandate to report data breaches within specified timeframes, potentially leading to significant fines and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, which involves downplaying the severity of the incident to avoid external scrutiny, is ethically unsound and legally risky. Such an action undermines transparency and fails to protect the rights of data subjects, directly contravening the principles of data protection. A third incorrect approach, which involves conducting a superficial review without a structured impact assessment, risks overlooking critical vulnerabilities and failing to implement adequate safeguards, thereby perpetuating the risk of future breaches. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with immediate containment of the incident, followed by a comprehensive impact assessment. This assessment should involve legal counsel and data privacy experts to ensure all regulatory requirements are identified and met. The framework should then guide the decision on notification and remediation, prioritizing the protection of individuals and compliance with the law. Continuous monitoring and review of data security practices should be an integral part of this process to foster a culture of data protection.